It's the kind of town no one would ever suspect. Weston-super-Mare, a sleepy stretch of English seaside where pensioners stroll the promenade and holidaymakers line up for ice cream on the pier. A place of quiet streets and fish and chip shops, more postcard than crime scene. But even the calmest waters can hide shadows. And behind closed doors here, one man was quietly building a drug empire that would stretch across borders and rake in millions. To his neighbors, Alex Mail was forgettable. Just another 30-something with no flash car, no designer clothes, no reason to draw attention. But behind encrypted phones, he wasn't Alex at all. He was Original Dagger, sometimes Ragnar.com, the digital mastermind of a cartel pipeline pushing cocaine and ketamine through Britain's southwest. A kingpin who ruled not with muscle, but with encrypted messages. He believed his empire was invisible. He believed his system was unbreakable. This is the story of Alex Mail, a story of encrypted messages, of cocaine and ketamine, of fugitives slipping between borders, and a story that tested the reach of law enforcement across Europe and beyond. To understand how a man from Weston-super-Mare became one of Britain's most wanted cartel bosses, we need to go back, before the fugitive alerts, before the Moroccan arrest, to the quiet seaside town where he blended in almost perfectly. Between March and June 2020, just 4 months, Alex Mail's network was linked to at least 130 kilograms of high-purity cocaine. At wholesale level, that haul was worth around £4.5 million. But on the streets, it translated into something far more dangerous. Once cut, diluted, and divided into smaller deals, it had the potential to reach tens of thousands of users across Britain's southwest. And cocaine was only part of the story. EncroChat revealed at least 50 kilograms of ketamine moving through his network during the same period. In one April transaction alone, Mail was connected to a £26,600 deal. Proof that he wasn't dabbling in petty trades. These were wholesale consignments, measured in kilos, not grams. His customers weren't corner dealers, but regional distributors, men who would go on to flood communities further down the chain. The numbers were staggering, but the impact went far beyond economics. Every kilo of cocaine entering through Mail's network rippled outwards. Once stepped on, diluted with caffeine, lidocaine, even laundry powder, those kilos multiplied. That meant more users, more debt, and more people chasing highs that were always weaker, dirtier, and more dangerous. The health consequences were severe. Soaring hospital admissions for chest pain, paranoia, and heart attacks tied to cocaine use. Families watched loved ones spiral into addiction. Domestic burglaries and thefts spiked as users scrambled to fund habits that could cost hundreds of pounds a week. Ketamine brought its own toll. Once dismissed as a club drug, it has become a growing crisis in Britain's A&E departments. Long-term users suffer from ketamine bladder, a condition so severe it can leave young people incontinent, facing life-altering surgeries. Each bulk order Mail arranged meant hundreds of teenagers and 20-somethings stumbling out of nightclubs, unconscious on pavements, or hooked on a drug that quietly eats away at the body. Police and prosecutors stressed that this wasn't just about narcotics changing hands, it was about violence. High-purity cocaine is currency in the underworld. Dealers robbed one another for it. Debts triggered beatings. Turf wars escalated into stabbings. Even in small towns, the presence of wholesale consignments like Mail's meant a spike in intimidation, gang rivalry, and blood on the pavement. One EncroChat message set the price of a kilogram of cocaine at £37,500. Another laid out logistics in cold, calculated detail. Photographs of sealed 1-kilo blocks, stamped with markings from international suppliers, left little room for doubt. Prosecutors described the evidence as overwhelming, but behind every photo and every coded message were human shadows. Addicts in back alleys, parents drained of savings, children growing up in homes fractured by dependency. To his neighbors in Weston-super-Mare, Mail was just another man in a seaside town, someone you might pass on the high street without notice. But investigators painted a very different picture. He was the linchpin of a multi-million-pound operation, a quiet organizer linking global suppliers to local markets. His decisions and encrypted chats shaped the flow of drugs across an entire region, and the consequences were measured not only in kilos seized, but in lives damaged. Every deal wasn't just profit, it was another addict lost, another family broken, another community eroded by the silent weight of cocaine and ketamine moving through Britain's streets. Before we proceed, let's trace back the early life of Alex Mail. He was born around 1992 and grew up in Weston-super-Mare. Unlike many figures in Britain's underworld, there was no teenage infamy, no gang-related headlines, no early notoriety that set him apart. His profile was almost invisible. He didn't fit the stereotype of a gangster. There were no social media clips flaunting wads of cash, no custom sports cars roaring down the high street. He moved differently, quietly, strategically. While others craved attention, Mail cultivated distance. He existed behind screens, and when he needed to be seen, it was only through aliases. Online, he was Original Dagger. At times, Ragnar.com. Names that sounded like gamer tags but masked something far darker. The orchestrator of a drug pipeline feeding Britain's southwest. For years, investigators knew little about him. His early record left no obvious trail. No flashy purchases, no brazen stunts. Mail operated like smoke. Hard to grasp, harder to pin down. This difference became his greatest strength. Where traditional gangsters often burned bright and fast, Alex Mail built quietly in the shadows. And by the late 2000s, he was no longer just a name on the periphery of intelligence reports. Law enforcement would come to describe him as an organizer, a figure who rarely touched drugs directly, but whose decisions shaped how they moved through the region. The turning point came with EncroChat, a supposedly unbreakable encrypted network favored by criminals across Europe. To investigators, it was a wall of silence. To Mail, it was the perfect playground. Behind his aliases, Mail communicated with suppliers, negotiated with distributors, and managed logistics with cold precision. He didn't need to meet street dealers face to face. He didn't need to shout his power. His authority existed in the coded words sent through secure devices. Prosecutors later painted him as a man deeply embedded in both cocaine and ketamine supply, laundering the proceeds through intricate financial schemes. At one point, he was even linked to a conspiracy to acquire a firearm, a charge that did not survive to his final guilty pleas, but one that underscored the danger investigators believed his network posed. Among officers chasing him, his name began to circulate with a mythical weight, a ghost in the system, a man who never flaunted his wealth, never paraded his success, but operated with apparent impunity. Untouchable, some officers called him, but even the most secure walls can crack. In 2020, French and Dutch investigators infiltrated EncroChat, handing British police a once-in-a-generation opportunity. For the first time, officers could see what Mail had been hiding, not just conversations but evidence. Photographs of solid 1 kilogram blocks of cocaine, messages noting purity levels, pricing coded in shorthand, yet clear to those in the trade. EncroChat had been his shield. Now it was a window exposing his empire. By June 2020, Operation Venetic, the nationwide crackdown on EncroChat users, was in full swing. Across Britain, traffickers and dealers were falling. Among them was Alex Mail. That summer, the Southwest Regional Organized Crime Unit finally arrested their so-called ghost. For detectives, it looked like a breakthrough. But then something unexpected happened. Mail was released on bail, pending further investigation. For a man accused of handling millions in cocaine and ketamine, it was a moment of opportunity. And instead of waiting for trial, Alex Mail took it. He vanished. Overnight, the quiet organizer became a fugitive. By January 2022, Mail's face was plastered across the National Crime Agency's most wanted list. He wasn't just a dealer anymore. He was framed as a cartel boss on the run. Crime Stoppers appeals placed him in Spain, the familiar refuge of British fugitives. From there, whispers placed him in Portugal, blending into expat communities. Then Turkey, where in May 2022, he was briefly detained by authorities. For a moment, the chase seemed over, but once again, he slipped through. Life as a fugitive meant constant paranoia. Every border crossing was a risk. Every hotel check-in carried danger. One slip of a passport, one unlucky stop, and the empire builder from Weston-super-Mare would be exposed. He survived with false papers, multiple identities, and constant movement. But invisibility has a limit. On 21st January 2024, the cracks finally showed. At a Moroccan border crossing, Mail attempted to enter with forged documents. Officers pulled him aside. There was no dramatic shootout, no high-speed chase, just a quiet arrest in a border control office. For months, extradition paperwork traveled between London and Rabat. Moroccan police held him while the British government pressed its case. On the 7th of August 2024, the waiting ended. Mail was placed on a flight back to the UK, escorted under guard. The man who had spent 4 years slipping between borders now stood in Exeter Magistrates' Court, cornered at last. The trial opened in September 2024 at Exeter Crown Court. By then, prosecutors had assembled an overwhelming case. Line by line, message by message, EncroChat evidence stripped Mail's empire bare. On the 13th of September, he pleaded guilty. Conspiracy to supply cocaine, conspiracy to supply ketamine, money laundering, and he wasn't the only one. Prosecutors reminded the court that several of his associates were already behind bars. In March 2024, 4 men linked to Mail's network had received a combined 56 years in prison. Others had been sentenced in 2023. The empire had been collapsing piece by piece. On the 2nd of December 2024, sentencing arrived. The judge handed down 18 years in prison. For Mail, the man who thought he could outwit borders, the courtroom walls must have felt tighter than any checkpoint. Prosecutors presented the story with clinical precision. Encrypted phones, kilo blocks of cocaine, coded bank transfers. Against the weight of evidence, the defense had little room to move. For investigators, the verdict was more than a conviction. It was the removal of a significant player in Britain's organized crime landscape. Law enforcement agencies called the case a landmark. The Southwest Regional Organized Crime Unit described Mail as a significant regional organizer, whose arrest disrupted not just one group, but entire supply chains feeding drugs into the Southwest. The National Crime Agency echoed the point. Mail's capture meant less cocaine, less ketamine, less violence. And none of it would have been possible without EncroChat. Investigators admitted openly, without that crack in the system, Mail might still be out there, operating quietly, orchestrating consignments worth millions. His eventual arrest in Morocco underscored something else: the level of international cooperation now required to tackle organized crime. British agencies, European partners, and Moroccan police all played roles in bringing him home. But perhaps the most sobering lesson was this: global drug supply chains don't just flow through major cities. They seep into small towns, hidden in plain sight. Weston-super-Mare wasn't just a holiday town anymore. It was a hub in a global network. From the outside, Alex Mail was just another man from a seaside town. But his story revealed something darker. A quiet beginning in Weston-super-Mare, the careful construction of a network that moved cocaine and ketamine across Britain's southwest. Aliases like Original Dagger and Ragnar.com, masking an empire. 4 months in 2020, where 130 kilograms of cocaine and 50 kilograms of ketamine flowed through his organization. And then, the collapse. EncroChat cracked. Operation Venetic. His arrest, his bail, and his disappearance. 4 years on the run. False passports, border crossings, life lived in exile. Until Morocco, January 2024, when forged papers finally failed him. By December, Britain's so-called invisible cartel boss was sentenced to 18 years in prison. But the question remains, does 18 years truly match the scale of his crimes? Or did one of Britain's most elusive cartel bosses escape with a lighter sentence than he deserved? We want to hear your thoughts. Should sentencing in cases like this be tougher? Was the international hunt worth the resources? And what do you make of EncroChat? A platform once thought unbreakable, now the single biggest intelligence coup in modern policing. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to subscribe. For more untold stories of UK cartels, fugitives, and the global chase to bring them down, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every network, no matter how carefully built, eventually leaves a trail.